everybody, Jimmy Smith, this time with another viewer-inspired video. A lot of people have asked me about this, but I got to give credit where it's due. I asked you guys, if you have any suggestions, please let me know. But I was asked about the biggest MMA fighter to never win a title in the UFC. A UFC fighter, right? Could talk about Fedor, could talk about Krokop. I'm not talking about guys who left their prime somewhere else, who just weren't in the UFC in their prime. I'm talking about great UFC fighters who just didn't win the big one. Now, I will also speak not just about this, but about fighters who people put on their list that I don't, and why I don't. But this was suggested by MMA Now 27. Give this one a like, give this one a subscribe. Obviously, I really appreciate it, guys, all the feedback and everything in the comments. You guys have been really keeping me going when it comes to my YouTube channel, but I really appreciate all the love and feedback. So please, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff. So, greatest MMA fighters to never win the big one in the UFC. Now, one of them that's really easy is one that I already spoke about, was Alistair Overeem in the heavyweight division. I think he's the most talented heavyweight all around to never win a title in the UFC. And I broke this down a bit when I was talking about Strikeforce versus UFC. Great kickboxer. Some people, when I said he had a great submission game, guys, he won the ADCC trials in Europe. He did have a great submission game. Really, really good. Not Frank Mir, not Minotauro, not one of the submission-heavy guys, but had an amazing guillotine, did have a decent ground game. And his wrestling, of course, nothing great, but giant heavyweight with incredible skills. He just had inconsistencies that kept him from fighting the best guys when he could have. Also, everybody knows about him getting suspended for doping. That's a huge part of it. Got popped right when he was about to get a title shot in the UFC. That derailed him. So the timing just wasn't great for Alistair Overeem. But when it comes to the heavyweight division, when I think guys that had everything to be champ and just never did it in the UFC, Alistair's got to be number one in the heavyweight division. But that inconsistency is what really held him back. Even more people talk about, I talk about his doping. Yeah, doping, plenty of guys dope. It was that inconsistency in the octagon itself that held him back even more than the doping scandals. So, a low-hanging fruit for almost everybody is Joseph Benavidez. 4 title shots in the UFC, 4 losses to Demetrius Johnson in 2 of them, and the other 2 to Deiveson Figueiredo. Now, the jury is still a little bit out on Deiveson Figueiredo, right? He's still fighting. We don't know his overall legacy, all that stuff, but a damn good 125-pounder, to say the least. Damn good. And he just housed Benavidez both times. And of course, Demetrius Johnson is the greatest 125-pounder of all time. So part of my criteria here in my list, and Joseph Benavidez is definitely there, is you would have won if not for this legend in your way. If anybody else had been champ at 125, Benavidez is probably champion. He just ran into the greatest of all time right in his prime. And then Deiveson Figueiredo, his window might have been a little bit short. I think he was too big for the division. Was still an animal, in that window. Just destroyed Benavidez. So Joseph Benavidez has to be near the top of any list of, guy who just didn't win a title in the UFC. Also, Sergio Pettis beat him. That's about it. Lost to Dominic Cruz at 35 in the WEC. He doesn't have any of those step-down performances. It's not that he was up and down and got a couple title shots. We'll get to a couple of those fighters in a minute. But he was basically streaking through everybody except when he hit those legends at the top. Disappointing. It is what it is. Joseph Benavidez, never a champ in the UFC. Has to be near the top of any list of someone who didn't win a title in the UFC. Another one that you when I think about elite guys that just ran into an all-time great at the time, I think John Fitch is maybe the poster boy for that, where he just beat everybody else in the division. Ran in GSP, lost a one-sided fight at 170 pounds, and that was it. The problem with John Fitch, too, is unlike a lot of people on this list, he didn't get multiple title opportunities because his style wasn't that appealing. Personality-wise, I like John. He's a good dude. Didn't have fans screaming up and down, jumping up and down, hoping he got a title shot again. So he only got one opportunity. He's one of the few on this list who only got one shot. Overeem got one too. But the idea that John Fitch's style, the UFC didn't really have a reason to get behind him and give him multiple opportunities. I really believe had he beaten GSP, or if someone else had been champion, he would have had a long reign at 170. He just had the skills, had the size, had the determination, had the gas tank to really be a great champion. He just ran into prime GSP. And it is what it is. Now, a lot of people will put Dustin Poirier on this list. I am not. I'm not putting Colby Covington on this list. Why? They're still fighting. They still could technically become champion. Dustin Poirier would not surprise me if he got the next title shot against Islam Makhachev, because they don't have anybody right now to fight Islam Makhachev. Maybe he wins and it becomes irrelevant. So I'm not going over guys that are still in it and still doing great work. Colby, of course, hasn't looked good in his last few fights, right, with the Leon Edwards loss and the Kamaru Usman losses, but he could still get there, hypothetically, right? Let's say he fights Ian Machado Gary and wins and he could be champion. So I'm not going to people that are still in it. Now, Tony Ferguson is no longer in it. He's fighting, technically, but he has just looked terrible in his last few fights. Go back as far as you want. Since the Justin Gaethje loss, he has not been the same guy. Is he on my list? Yes. But when I look at Tony Ferguson's legacy here, when I look at the guys he beat, it's the streak that really does it, right? It's the streak of guys. And when you talk about Tony Ferguson, it isn't that the names were, all-time greats. It's that the guy went from the Michael Johnson fight to the Justin Gaethje fight without a loss. It was like 8 years or something. It was incredible. Incredible how long he went without losing. But when you look at the names, are they the greatest of that era? Donald Cerrone, Anthony Pettis, Kevin Lee, Rafael dos Anjos. Those are the biggies, right? Those are the big four. Cowboy Cerrone, of course, had his problems. I think Anthony Pettis was past his prime by that point. Kevin Lee, talented but inconsistent. Rafael dos Anjos, solid, definitely, for sure. I think too big for 55, too small for 170. But most of that streak, Lando Vannata, okay? Edson Barbosa, tough. Josh Thompson, well past his prime. The Punk, love him, past his prime. Gleison Tibau, solid. Abel Trujillo, Danny Castillo, right? It's this idea that the actual prime, really good guys he beat were at the end. And I don't know, Cowboy Cerrone, Anthony Pettis past his prime, Kevin Lee, good, not great. So he's on my list. He's not my runaway number one like he is to a lot of people. The reason we put him high on the list is the length of the streak. It's a long time. And the misses with Khabib. I'm not even going to go into all the times that it fell through. I was supposed to call one of them, and he got hurt on April 1st. We all thought it was a joke, by the way. So Tony Ferguson is on my list. He isn't number one simply because a lot of guys on here had multiple title opportunities, and he didn't. He was the interim champion, didn't get the lineal title shot. And it's not like he beat every name of his era except, Khabib, right? When he started taking on the names like, Charles Oliveira and Justin Gaethje, they're kind of one-sided. So he's on this list. He's not number one. Here's one that I think is interesting. Please let me know in the comment section what you think of this one, because this is a little controversial. He's a friend of mine. Chael Sonnen. I put him on this list, and I told him a couple weeks ago when I interviewed him on my SiriusXM show that I put him on my list of top fighters to never win a title. He's on there. But it's basically because he had such an amazing performance against Anderson Silva, the greatest middleweight of all time. If he had just hung on for another, whatever it was, 2 minutes, he's champion, and it's over. Bungled it away at the end. But the run that got him there, Dan Lazon, Yushin Okami, Nate Marquardt. Good, not great, right? So it's not like he just destroyed everybody at 185. He was an up and down guy at 185, got on a streak that got him a title shot. And then the reason he's on this list is he came this effing close to beating the greatest, dominating, not just beating, dominating the greatest middleweight of all time. And in the second fight, everybody forgets he was housing, destroying Anderson the first round, had full mount, beating the crap out of him. I thought he was going to get stopped. Threw a spinning back fist and ate a shot in return, and it was over. What you have to remember about Chael is Chael's reputation in MMA. And I was training with Jason Miller, I think, when he was going to fight Chael. This was way back in the days, like 2001 or something. And when Chael started getting, doing damage in WC and the UFC, he would be winning and he'd find a way to bungle away fights. That was like the scouting report on Chael. Like, man, he's really talented. He's a great wrestler, blah, blah, blah. Big for the weight class. he finds a way to lose big fights. He did it to Jeremy Horn. He did it to Babalu. He did it to Paulo Filho. In fights where he's either winning or it's right there, and he would give up usually a submission. Just, like, what are you doing? He had a tendency of doing that. And he did it again against Anderson Silva. So he's on this list based on basically those two fights where he was doing so well, but he did what Chael was known at the time for doing, which is just, God dang it, don't give up a submission in the last few seconds. So it's funny. He's one of the best to never win a title, but I don't necessarily put him on the all-time great list for middleweight. So it's a little bit of a contradiction, but let me know what you think in the comment section. Another one that a lot of people put on lists, which I understand, is Urijah Faber. Urijah Faber, of course, ran into a prime Dominic Cruz. Beat him, by the way, in WEC at 45. Fought him twice in the UFC at 35. First fight was pretty close. Second one, Dominic Cruz was just a level better than he was. And then same problem against Renan Barão, where he got a lot of title shots. And that's another thing to keep in mind for this list is Urijah Faber, the California kid, good-looking, articulate, fans loved him. So, yeah, you're going to get a lot of title opportunities. You're just, rather than the UFC going, all right, we see what we're getting. John Fitch, all right, you lost once, get back in the line. Urijah Faber's always going to be at the front of the line. Also, in his prime, he beat everybody else. It was like Urijah just couldn't get over the hump of Dominic Cruz and Renan Barão. And everybody else, and everybody forgets, too, how amazing Renan Barão was. He's an underrated champion that is kind of lost to history, but, man, he was good in his prime. But Urijah Faber, definitely on the list, beat everybody, but, Dominic Cruz, essentially, of course, also Renan Barão. But if he hadn't run into these legends, he's champion. He probably runs for a while. Part of the difficulty is I think he spent his best years in WEC, unfortunately. Still did great things in the UFC. Still a lot of fun. Still beat some good guys. But I think his best years are probably in the WEC. That's just me. But probably when I think about this, my number one, and these aren't in any particular order, my number one general, when I think about it, when people say, Jimmy, who's the best to never win a title? Kenny Florian really does make my list of top guys to never win a title. Why? Number one, he was amazingly skilled. He could do a lot. Fantastic jiu-jitsu, really slick Muay Thai, great gas tank, really versatile, really high fight IQ, really well coached. He had all the elements. What did he run into? Sean Shirk, who maybe you guys don't know who he is. The muscle shark, Sean Shirk. It's not easy to say. A powerhouse wrestler who just took him down and took him down and took him down and took him down and took him down. Got popped, by the way. Was stripped of his title. That's why most of you don't know. He didn't have a long run at the elite level because of that at 55. But he took Kenny Florian down ad nauseum. Kenny Florian cut him so bad. It looked like a machete, hit Sean Shirk in the forehead. Cut him up pretty bad, but couldn't win the fight. Couldn't get a stoppage because of the cut. Couldn't win the fight. Ran into Sean Shirk. Goes on a streak. Takes on prime BJ Penn, which in my previous video about fighters in their prime who were amazing, BJ Penn is the top of my list. So he ran into prime BJ Penn, did everything he could, hung with BJ Penn as long as he could, ended up giving up a rear naked choke and losing in that fight. Goes down to 145. Who does he run into? Jose Aldo. And just nobody's going to beat a prime Jose Aldo. And that's what he ran into. So 45 and 55, he ran into three guys. Two, at least, are all-time greats. You put Sean Shirk on that list if you wanted. A little limited. But he ran into two of them. Most of the people on this list ran into one. They just happened, John Fitch happened to run into GSP, right? Kenny Florian ran into two, arguably three guys who were really great in their respective weight classes and couldn't get over the hump despite the skill set he had. And I actually had the opportunity to work with Kenny Florian on the Fox desk. And I said, man, who hit you hardest? And he goes, punching BJ Penn, kicking Jose Aldo. Not surprising. BJ Penn, very heavy-handed. Jose Aldo, of course, we know about his lightning kicks. But he just ran into legends right in their prime. So that's a little list. Those are my personal favorites. Fighters who never won a title in the UFC despite fighting in the UFC. Let me know what you think. Give me a like, subscribe. Appreciate you.